Well, welcome so much. I'm so glad that you're all here tonight. My name is Dolin, and tonight we're here to talk about college. But before we start, I want you to imagine that everything you've heard about the college process is completely wrong. You've probably heard that it's stressful, it's chaotic, it's virtually impossible, and it feels overwhelming. Well, it doesn't actually have to be like that. Imagine instead that for you and your child, it's a process that's smooth, it's organized, it's efficient, and it's not overly stressful. Well, your child's journey can go in that direction, and that's what we're here to talk about this evening. So let's dive in. And I want you to meet Rebecca Harris. She's here tonight to help make it all a lot easier for all of us. Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you, Anne. It's nice to see so many people from so many different places.
I think so too. I love that. Just a bit about Rebecca's background. She's a college consultant here with us at Educational Connections. So every day she's working with kids one-on-one to get them through the college process, to help to make it easier, smoother, and to ultimately get into the college of their choices. She's a former University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill admissions evaluator. And I love that Rebecca has had experience on the other side of the table in reviewing students' applications to determine would they be good fits for her university. She has a BA in education and psychology, both from UNC Chapel Hill, and also a master's degree in education. And I think, Rebecca, probably your proudest accomplishment is that you're a mom of a high school senior. So you've been through all of this yourself.
Most definitely.
Well, Rebecca, let's start out with the landscape of college admissions right now. It is so different. I mean, certainly from when we applied to college. And even if parents listening tonight have had older children, it's even changed in the last couple of years. What's going on in college admissions these days?
You certainly couldn't be more right about that, Anne. It's one of the first things I often talk about with parents is how much it's changed, not just since, of course, we went to college, but even just within the past few years. So if you're looking at particularly just since COVID, how things have changed, application volume has gone up tremendously, which in turn means acceptance rate goes down. More applications, you can't take everyone, and so it drives down your acceptance rate. Overall, the Common Application is reporting about a 30% increase in application volume just since the 2019-2020 admission cycle.
That's a lot. That's a big change. Why have you seen that change? Why so many more applications?
I think it's a variety of reasons that come into play. The Common App has contributed to that. It's easier to apply to more schools. Students want to give themselves lots of options. And then, of course, during COVID, particularly when schools paused on testing requirements, they saw that it was just more accessible. And so students were applying to more places when they could be test optional.
I've seen that too. Kids are applying to far more schools than they ever did before. That's for sure. But, along the way, parents have really a choice when it comes to admissions and helping guide their kids. They can either, number one, take control of the process, or what often happens is the process controls them. And nobody really wants that latter option. Why is it important for parents to be proactive and not reactive when they start to think about admissions?
Yeah. Well, and we all know we can't go back in time as much as we would like to in some points, but you are right. Starting early really helps you to take control, not just of the application process, but really of your high school experience in general. It allows you to be proactive instead of reactive in your planning and your experiences over time. Avoiding regret, we never want to look back with the "I wish I had done this then," but it really allows for the strategy behind it and doing things with intention and purpose. And so, the earlier the better. There really is not too early of a time. I've had conversations with folks even in middle school as they looking ahead to their high school times. And summer, given where we are at this point in the year, it's a great time to do that. When you're paused, you're a little more relaxed and have more time to really, think things through and to map things out.
Yes, for sure. So we also know that as part of the application process, when you as an evaluator at Chapel Hill looked at applications and when admissions folks across the country do, first and foremost, they're looking at grades and the strength of the student's curriculum. Those are really the factors in the forefront. And it really lends itself to course selection in middle and high school. How is that important, and how does it factor into all of the other things that admissions folks look for in an application?
Course selection certainly is critically important. Your schedule builds on itself year over year. So I always tell students that the clock really begins from day one of your freshman year in ninth grade. Every year is 25% of the total. And so it really matters from day one when you hit the ground running. So thinking about not just, here and now, but going forward, because it does that build on itself. Your strength of schedule, as you mentioned, is something that's taken into consideration. Have you maximized your opportunities relative to what your school offers? So are you challenging yourself? Are you taking the classes that are, a challenge for you? You can also be successful in those classes, but those are important. And then they're also looking at grade trends over time. I mentioned that it starts from day one of your freshman year, but people come out of the gate differently in terms of their readiness or preparedness or even maturity for high school. And so I have sometimes people say, well, oh my goodness, freshman year was really hard and I struggled my way through it. Does that mean I'm kind of done? And it doesn't. And so there's things to talk about there is like, how can we show upward trends and, positive trajectory, things along those lines. So it is really important to kind of have your 4-year plan, we like to think of it as, and what it's going to look like year over year so that you can end up where you want to be starting now.
Is that something that you help students with when they're younger? We mentioned 8th, 9th, 10th graders. Are you helping them to really pick the choices that are most strategic for them?
Absolutely. It would be looking at what they're currently taking, how they're performing in those classes, and what would be the next best fit course for that particular student. It's not a one size fits all approach. College consulting, it's very individualized. And, we keep using that word strategic and supportive, but that is indeed what it is. And so it's looking at courses you're currently taking, what's the next best step? And how can, you show upward trends or continuing to challenge yourself. Some students come in at a very high level, and of course you want to maintain that. If you're coming in at a place where, this is where I'm comfortable at right now and I need to show growth over time, we can work with that too. So it is important to really assess where you are and where you want to go.
So we talked about grades and strength of schedule. And I know you told me, well, that really replaces the word rigor now. So let's talk about other things that are really important, like extracurriculars and hobbies. Why do colleges even care what kids do outside of school?
They make you who you are, right? You can imagine that on paper, students tend to look very similar in terms of courses that they've taken, especially from within the same high school. So they've often taken similar courses, they've earned similar grades, GPAs might be similar. So what is it that makes you tick? What is it about each individual that they're passionate about? And this varies from student to student. Some students are more self-aware or, really have an understanding of who they are and what they like more so than others. Particularly older students seem to be in a different position. But it is important to start to think about what do I enjoy? What am I passionate about? How do I want to spend my time outside of the classroom?
And I would think the summer is a good time to kind of explore those things too, right?
Absolutely. I think for younger students, you just use the word explore, and it's a perfect opportunity to really get out there and try different things, explore your options, find out, what it is that really drives you, what your interests are. Admission evaluators, in terms of looking at passions, they start to develop this picture of you based on who they see you being and how they think you might fit into their campus. What would you involve yourself in? How would you spend your time there? And so those are the kinds of things that help them to get to know you as a person beyond just a student on paper.
And I can imagine that some kids come to the process really not knowing what they're good at or what they want to do. They have no idea about a major. They're just kind of like in those initial stages. And what is it that you do with them to help them find their passions? Can you talk a little bit about different situations you've been in with kids?
Absolutely. I mentioned to you, Ann, that some folks come in knowing very much who they are, what they like, and what they want to do, and others are very different, and each are fine. And I promise that each will get to the same place in terms of submitting those applications and getting to where they want to be, despite how that might feel to parents, especially at times. It used to be, we felt like we had to do all the things, right? We just spread ourselves thin. But that thinking has really changed, and it's more about depth over breadth. So digging into what it is that you like, that you're good at, what you enjoy doing, where you feel like you make a difference, and really, exploring and digging and going deep into those particular things. When it comes time for college applications, you have the opportunity to share 10 of those activities in your application, which maybe 10 sounds like, oh my goodness, I have to do 10 things. To some of you, that might sound overwhelming depending on where you are. But my advice would be start keeping track of any and all the things that you're doing right now. I've said before, it starts the first day of ninth grade. So colleges want to see that picture of what you've done over your 4 years of high school. So it's never too early. Doesn't have to be a fancy and sophisticated list, but really just kind of a brain dump that turns into something more sophisticated along the way in terms of how we present that information in applications.
You sometimes take kids that have like 20 things written down and try to parse them out with them and figure out how long they spent on each activity and then kind of organize them onto the list? Or how do you do that when kids have a lot of things or when kids have hardly anything?
Yeah, so ideally, if you feel like you're lacking in terms of activities and interest, we start to talk about, well, what is it that you're doing? Oftentimes, you're really minimizing what you're doing, and there are lots more things that are going on. It doesn't just have to be school activities. It can be church. It can be in your community. It can be scouts. It's showing leadership in some of the things that you're already doing. It can be sports. It can be lessons that you're taking. It can be mowing a lawn. Colleges really value part-time work. And so, really thinking through and thinking out loud sometimes really helps you realize you are doing much more than you even thought. And then for those that have this really robust resume of tons of activities, sometimes we, through conversation, we start to think about relevance and what really is it that you're most passionate about and feel like you're making the most difference. Sometimes you can collapse a couple of activities into one and be strategic in how you present that information. So there's certainly a way. And that's why I said it's not a one size fits all approach. It really is looking at each individual.
What I love about the work that we do is sometimes we take kids that think that there's nothing unique or special about them, but there always, always is. And one of the ways we have to help kids is a tool that we use called AchieveWorks. And it helps students uncover their aspects about their personality, their aptitudes, and their interests. Why is this important for kids when they take this assessment, Rebecca, to help them on their journey and determining what their passion is or what they might want to do later on?
I think the most important, or maybe one of the most valuable pieces of this assessment is for the self-reflection that comes as a part of it. The admission process, the application process requires tons of self-reflection and digging deep into who you are. It can be uncomfortable for some students. For some, they're very self-aware. But this assessment really helps you to uncover and to gain valuable insight into your personality, gives you some ideas of jobs that might correspond to who you are, what you like, how you work, those kinds of things. So it can be particularly helpful for students that maybe are unsure, but certainly everybody stands to gain something from taking assessments like this. I personally love them.
I love them too. And I love to see kids' faces light up when they're like, oh, I am good at that.
Yes,
It really is enlightening to kids, as you mentioned.
for sure.
All right. So, Rebecca, let's shift gears a little bit because we talked about strength of schedule. We talked about grades. We talked about extracurriculars. Now, more than ever before, testing is playing a big role in admissions. So let's start out with the testing factor in general. It used to be that colleges really were test optional during the pandemic, but now most colleges, even the ones that say they're test optional, really they're valuing a test score. What are some of the trends that you're seeing amongst the high school seniors that you worked with this past year in the admissions cycle?
For sure. So, we mentioned earlier on that one of the things that came out of COVID was kind of pausing just because of a variety of reasons why schools were moving test optional during COVID, which, sent that application rate kind of through the roof. And so now folks are realizing, well, there is some value in that standardized test score. I mentioned standardized because it is a standardized measure. Students look from school to school, things vary. And so this is one standardized measure that they really can value in evaluation. So we're starting to see more and more schools moving back to this. Additionally, oftentimes this can be a factor in merit scholarship consideration. Even if I've seen through this, through these past couple of years where schools have been test optional, the caveat was if you wanted to be considered for merit scholarship, you did have to still present an SAT or an ACT score. Sometimes it's used as part of honors programming consideration at the collegiate level. So, there certainly are benefits to putting forward a test score and certainly taking that seriously. And as things are seeming to go back to the way they used to be in terms of requiring a test.
Yes, for sure. And we've also seen that even when schools don't require a test, the majority of kids that they're admitting are submitting a test. So it's important to note that as well. All right. So along the testing journey, when kids first start, they encounter the PSAT. And usually kids will take this in 10th and 11th grade, sometimes in 9th grade too. What is the PSAT and what is the reason behind it?
Sure. So, Anne, the PSAT is often given sometimes in 9th, 10th, and 11th grades. It really depends on your school. You typically will see it in 10th or 11th grade, more common than 9th grade, but sometimes you see 9th graders taking it. It's practice. It's a practice test. There is some correlation between the PSAT and an SAT score. It certainly gives great exposure to kind of the format and the types of questions you would encounter in a standardized test. But at the end of the day, the PSAT is used to determine merit scholarship. National Merit Scholarship recipients or qualifiers. It's a qualifier for national merit. So something other to keep in mind is colleges do not use nor receive a PSAT score. So that can tend to be confusing for some students. They think that colleges receive this or automatically receive it. They do not. It is the same company, obviously, the College Board that makes the SAT. So again, that correlation between the two. But it can be great practice. And oftentimes this can be the first introductory test to, a standardized test in this type of way.
Yes, for sure. So let's dive into the SAT and the ACT. And by the way, parents, we're going to do a Q&A in just a little bit. So if you have a question, feel free to pop it into the chat now, and I'll get to it in just a few minutes. All right. So the SAT, this used to be the test that, especially in the Mid-Atlantic area, that lots of kids went to. But now with the ACT, oftentimes kids will take that test instead. There's definitely pros and cons to both tests. So let me explain what's going on with the SAT, because it has changed recently. First, as you probably heard, it is now all digital. There's no more paper and pencil, and it's adaptive. So that means kids take a section on the math, for example, and if they do really well, the next questions they get in the next section will be harder. If they don't do too well, they're going to get easy and medium questions. And that's the adaptive nature of the test. We've had adaptive tests for many, many years, but this is new for the SAT. The other thing to know about the SAT is it's considered to be a power test. And that means that for many kids, it's hard to get through because the questions are a little bit more difficult. They require analysis and critical thinking. And because they're wordier, there are fewer questions on the SAT. So the difficulty really isn't in the interpretation and the analysis of the questions. Sometimes kids will say, I'm not sure what that question really means, or what are they asking me? Now, the ACT is different. First of all, it's still a paper and pencil test, and it's considered to be more of a speed test. There are more questions, so you have to go a little bit quicker through each one, but they are shorter questions, and they're definitely more straightforward. And sometimes kids will say, oh, I understand these questions better. They feel more like school. But the difficulty in the SAT is really in the pacing and the speed. However, for kids with accommodations, many times they'll choose the ACT because the issue of time has been taken away, especially for those kids that get time and a half, that extended time accommodation. So we've seen that with the new digital SAT, because it's shorter, it's only 2 hours, and the ACT is 3 hours, that kids are starting to go towards the SAT, but we still see kids taking both tests. All right, Rebecca, let's talk a little bit about preparation, because that is key. In a perfect world, what would you like to see when it comes to testing for the students that you work with?
Sure. And so I want to clarify one point you just made. You mentioned, because I think I run into this question a lot with parents. You mentioned that we still see students taking both tests. And I think what you mean by that is either the SAT or the ACT.
Yes, for sure. I should
Got
have clarified that and said, yeah, you definitely do not need to prepare and take both tests. You really should just pick one and focus on that, put your efforts and your time into just one test, because you're going to score better that way too. Thanks
Right.
thanks for noticing that.
Completely agree. And no, I bring that point up because that's probably one of the most common questions I get from parents and students is, well, should I take both tests? To which my answer is no, absolutely not. Just go with one test that you feel like is stronger. And sometimes students are just undecided or unsure about which test they should take. But once that decision is reached, stick with the SAT or stick with the ACT, as you were saying, Ann. It is not necessary to take both. It does not matter which test you take from a college admission and evaluation standpoint. Most students will take a test 2 to 3 times to earn their best score. So in an ideal world, what I would love to see and encourage students to do is, especially with you guys that are on this conversation tonight, obviously you're thinking ahead and planning ahead. So kudos to you. It's what we love to see. It really, again, allows for planning, strategy, and less stress. But it also allows students to really go about this in a more systematic way. So ideally, I would love to see students do their test preparation between their sophomore and junior year. So in between that summertime, in between 10th and 11th grade, do some of that test prep and practice, then start to take the test during their junior year. And like I said, take it 2 to 3 times to achieve their best score and really have this part wrapped up by the end of their junior year. And then that allows for, more strategic and focused work on other parts of the application that come into play over the summer between junior and senior year. We all know the start of a school year every year is stressful and hectic anyway, and you can imagine add college applications on top of that in your senior year. So if we're moving along and we've had this piece complete, you will thank yourself later.
That's for sure. Yes. Yeah. And we see that, it used to be a number of years ago that kids would really prepare and take it in the spring of their junior year, which makes sense because that's generally your higher score. You've been in class for a more amount of time. You've had time to prepare. You're older, you're more mature. You've taken high level classes, but we've seen a trend to kids, like you said, preparing over the summer, taking their first test in the fall, getting their scores back, determining where they still need to prepare, working some more, and then taking it again, and then maybe even taking it a third time. Mm-hmm. So we've seen a trend towards, going earlier. And a lot of times, like you said, it's because there's so many other things going on that getting it out of the way earlier seems to definitely relieve stress. And when it comes to preparation, whatever you do with your child, really, as much as it can be individualized, that's really the best avenue. We used to do group classes, and we found that when we compared the results of kids and their score increase in the group classes versus in one-to-one tutoring, it wasn't even a match. The students in one-to-one tutoring far and away had much greater increases. And so it makes sense because anything that can be tailored just to an individual, it is going to be more helpful to them because they're working on just what they need to work on, not what other kids need to work on. So if we can help you in your journey through test prep, we're happy to chat. This is information on our programs, and you can scan the QR code, and it will take you directly to our program for test preparation. All right, Rebecca, so let's talk about some real kids and some issues that they've faced with college, where they were at the beginning, how you helped them, and really where they are now. And let's start with Mark. because when you started with Mark, he really wasn't sure what was special about him or what he wanted to do. Tell us a little bit about this student.
Absolutely. So this is my favorite part, the individualized nature of this process. Two very different students that I'll share a little bit about tonight. I'm sure it will resonate with some of you out there, but Mark was a student that I started working with coming into his freshman year, maybe a little more reluctantly. It was something his parents thought would be important for him to do. He had some older siblings that had gone through the college process. So they certainly had awareness and recognized all that it involved. So going into, high school as a rising freshman, he really didn't know what he wanted to do for a career. Not uncommon. Not many 14, 15-year-olds do. Some do, some don't. And he just really hadn't developed his passions with intent. Had some things he liked, some things he enjoyed, just your typical high school freshman boy. And so started out freshman year a little sluggish. Again, not uncommon. We talked about, different profiles of students. Some come out of the gate really strong and some take some time to kind of find their way. And that was exactly him. He got into his groove. He took some honors courses in ninth grade. He played on the school soccer team, a part of student government. So he certainly had some things that he enjoyed doing and was involved, which is important. He was one of these kids that had kind of a lawn mowing business, mowed some lawns in his neighborhood. And just, I mentioned playing soccer was something he really enjoyed. And so he was training to be a youth soccer referee, which he did in the fall. So then the next year, rising 10th grader, so where he's at, he will hold a leadership position in SGA. So that student government and encouraging him to really dig in, go deeper into things that you're doing, hold a leadership position, added some more advanced courses to his schedule for next year. So I mentioned that upward trend, progress over time. That is something that colleges really value in reviewing applications. He thinks he might be interested in sports medicine or athletic training. So time will tell. We certainly have some time. But my work with Mark really has involved supporting him and encouraging him, helping him chart a path that will show growth over time. We'll start to think about testing. I mentioned that he's got a little time, but later in the sophomore year, and certainly start to explore some colleges as he moves further into, the junior year, especially.
You mentioned course selection with Mark and then really gently encouraging him, and also seeing to it that he took a greater leadership position in student government. I wonder if his mother said those things to him too, Rebecca, and he wouldn't have it. Do you ever have those situations where parents really take on that role and then kids won't listen, but they'll, be open to somebody else with that information?
All of the time. That oftentimes singing from the same sheet music, if you will, as parents are, but just to hear it from somebody different or, somebody other than mom and dad, it often lands better for whatever reason. I think that is true of many things in life. But certainly it's conversations with parents as well. Ultimately, my work is really that one-on-one piece with the student, and we involve the parents in those conversations. But certainly being on the same page is critically important. Parents know best. They know their children better than anyone. And so, gaining some of that insight from them is really valuable too.
Thanks for sharing about Mark. Okay, let's talk about Emily because her story is a lot different.
Yep. So Emily had a very different trajectory. She came in again into high school, very focused. She, kind of ran the show, if you will, in terms of this is what I want, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to do it. And so it was, how can I support her and guide her through that process and helping her to reach her goals? She, not uncommon, wanted to be a vet. Lots of kids say that, and you think, okay, we'll see, we'll see how this goes. But she was very determined. She involved herself with animals in all kinds of ways outside of school. Strong academic performance right out of the gate, just a stellar transcript, if you will, in terms of challenging herself in advanced courses in 9th and 10th, and then moving into, the AP courses in 11th and 12th grade. Just to give you an idea of her profile, member of the environmental club, volunteered at an animal shelter. In school, she played volleyball and sang in the school choir. And then this summer, we'll hold a part-time job as kennel assistant, hoping that she might can become a veterinary assistant. Over time would be what she would want. So again, my work, as I said, was to keep her focused, help her to feel supported, and to keep her stress level low. She was a very, very high performer, high achieving student. But also to guide her through the application process. And I think she's probably most proud to say she will attend NC State this fall, and plans to major in, you got it, animal science.
I love that. And what a great school. That's awesome to hear about, Emily. Thank you for sharing about both of those students. All right. So as we wrap up, I want to, I hope that this has helped you as you have younger children to think about the journey as less stressful and less chaotic, and to know that it can be strategic, it can be efficient, it can actually be kind of fun. And we're happy to help you with that if we can be of assistance. We work with kids rising 8th graders, 9th graders, 10th graders. We have a program just for younger students, also one specifically for rising juniors, and then of course for rising seniors as well. You can scan this QR code and it will take you to our calendar to schedule a strategy call with either Erin or Jennifer, and they're both our college counselors that oversee the program. And the strategy call is about a 20-minute call, and it's meant to help you determine what might be a good angle for your child. So it's not a sales call at all. It's to hear about your child, what they've done in the past, what could maybe differentiate them, to share a little bit about our program and see if we're a match. And if we're not, we will absolutely guide you in the right direction. And we're happy to chat. Whoops, sorry about that. So let's go to the Q&A right now. Whoops, let me fix my screen. Sorry about that, everybody. Technical glitch there. All right, so I know we have a couple of questions in the chat. Let's see what we have. All right. Let's see. How are students compared to other students at my high school? And how many colleges should students apply to? That's from Melissa. So what are you thinking in terms of being compared to others at their own high school? That's a question that a lot of parents ask Rebecca, especially in high performing schools where everybody seems to be a good student and a lot of kids have a high GPA. How do colleges look at that?
Right. So one of the things I mentioned, Anne, was how do you distinguish yourself? What are those differentiators? And that's really where things beyond just the courses and the grades that students have earned. It's activities, it's your personal statement, your essay that really brings your application to life. Every school, while there is some standardization to the process, every college or university tends to have a little bit of nuance to it. And so you don't always know exactly how they go about evaluating applications. There's, a lot of myth out there that schools have quotas in terms of the number of students they can take from high schools. I think more often than not, that is a myth. So in looking at students from a particular school, they're not necessarily reading all of the applications. They could be spread out amongst, from the same school, they can be spread out amongst different evaluators, but really they're looking at the courses you've taken relative to what your school has offered. How have you performed in those courses? And then digging into the other pieces of your application. It's the holistic nature of the evaluation, which can be critically important in helping to determine, distinguish students from one to the other. Because, as you've said, on paper, students can look very similar in terms of a GPA. So those other factors really do come into play. Each application has what's called a school profile that goes along with it. So that kind of is the roadmap, if you will, that helps them to understand where they're coming from. I've had so many students say, well, such and such got in and we have the same GPA, but I promise you it is not a apples to apples to apples comparison. Every student is different and unique in some way.
So another parent asks, how many colleges should a student apply to? How do you determine that with the student? Is it different? Is there a general ballpark that you use?
Yeah, I would say, generally speaking, we mentioned about application volume having increased so much. The number of schools that students are applying to tends to have increased as well. Typically I will see students apply from anywhere from 6 to 10 colleges and universities. I think the important piece of that is creating, that balanced list, a variety of schools in terms of competitiveness, from the school in terms of how selective they are, but how competitive you are as an applicant, and finding schools within which you are a match, but also schools that you could actually see yourself attending, and we'll take the time to apply. But yep, 6 to 10 tends to be what I generally see students apply to. I want to give you some
Okay.
options.
Awesome. Jennifer asks, how often would you meet with kids that are a rising 10th grader? Because I know you'll meet with them a few times when they're younger and then continue on the path. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a rising 10th grader, I think, one student that I'm working with currently comes to mind, kind of doing a monthly check-in just to see how things are going. As the student progresses, into junior year, your meetings would pick up over time. In senior year, when it's thick of the admission season, we're meeting weekly, and sometimes even more than that when you're in the height of your application. But for a sophomore, for your younger students, just a monthly check-in would probably be sufficient. And then, of course, other times as needed.
Got it. Thank you. Robert asks, is it advisable to take a practice SAT and ACT to decide which to focus on? And is there a way to do it without counting so that you can prep for the real one later?
I've had students to do that. They have taken a practice SAT and a practice ACT, and Anne, you might could speak to this more in terms of what we as a company offer and suggest to students. But I've had students to do that, kind of preliminarily, and get a feel for what they think feels better to them, and certainly looking at them from a score standpoint. You can absolutely take a practice test without any kind of official score reporting, but also know if you actually took an official SAT or an official ACT, you control whether or not you send those scores anywhere. So even if you've taken it officially through the company itself, you don't necessarily have to send or share any of those scores until you're ready or want to.
Yes, that's a great point that, a number of years ago, it used to be that you did not own your data, but now you do. So you can choose which scores that you want to send. And we offer free practice tests. I think they're $20, Robert. But typically kids will take an ACT, and then we'll either have them take a practice SAT, or we can use their PSAT scores and do a comparison to help make a determination. For about 1/3 of kids, they score best on one test over the other, and that's the test that they should go with. But for the rest of kids, it really comes down to personal preference as well. But we're happy to help you make that decision. Another parent says, I have a rising 8th grader interested in computer science. He does coding on his own on public portals, but that can't be shown on college admissions. Any idea about an example of a specific coding activity that can be shown on an application?
So keep in mind, anything that's done prior to high school is not something that you share on a college application, unfortunately. And it sounds like especially the case in your child's situation. They're really only focused on the things that a student has done from 9th through 12th grade. I imagine this might be something that he would continue to do. There are various ways that students can showcase their work, which really would be more of an individualized conversation to have. But certainly if this is something it sounds like he's passionate about and good at, I would certainly encourage him to continue to do it.
Great point. And then one last question, Rebecca, somebody asked, if the student took a test all three times, does the college see all three tests? And the answer is, colleges now have software that super scores the tests. And so schools will see the top scores. Maybe they took the SAT 3 times. They'll see their top reading score and their top math score, and it will be joined together to be a super score. Rebecca, can you talk a little bit about that from the admissions end?
Yeah, for sure. So let's say your student has taken the test 3 times. You send the highest math, or the score that has the highest math and the score that has the highest reading, and was explaining it's combined to create your super score. On the back end of admissions, if you will, are folks that really kind of collect all of this information and data that's coming in for students on an individual basis, create that account, store it. Admissions evaluators don't get any of this information about a student until the file is complete. And that means all of the pieces that are required for an application, your test scores, your essay, your teacher recommendations, all these things are in, and their file is complete, and then it's sent on for review. So not to worry, they're not looking through, pieces and parts of information as it comes in, but that super scoring feature, that's just really a part of the software that admission offices use. It's automatically done. And so that's generally what is presented in your application. So when it gets to an evaluator, it's in a nice PDF format. And that's really all that they're looking at.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Rebecca. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight. I thought that was awesome. All the great information you gave to parents, Rebecca. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope that everybody found it helpful to you in your college journey. If when you log off, you're going to see a survey pop up. And if you would be so kind as to complete the survey to let us know what was helpful about the webinar and what you would see and like to see in the future, that will also help us to come up with new topics and new ideas. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming this evening. It was a pleasure to talk to you, and I wish you the best for this summer. Take care and good night.